topic says, it is advocacy session. While it is one of my favorite topic and we can go on the entire day, what we have done is we have picked up few topics which the industry is grappling with, so that the panelists can dwell more deeper and the session is more informative. As Aditya already introduced, these are the set of panelists who are part of the advocacy committee who constantly work together to strive the difference between the industry players and the regulators. To quickly begin without wasting much time, the first one is Devas, if you may lead. As you would know that AIF is a macro managed industry. Last year in 2020, SEBI came out with a very interesting concept of investment decision making. Who is responsible to make the investment decision making? Interestingly, it also passed on the joint responsibility to the investment committee for the set of investment managers who were responsible for managing investments along with the investment committee. We did a series of representations with SEBI. We spoke with them. We were part of the entire discussions that we were having with SEBI. It would be interesting to get your thought process on the background and how the industry is spread across for the investment committee setup.
Thank you, Leela, for setting the background, and a very good morning to everyone present with us on this interesting session. So just before we delve into the changes which came about, and IC and all of these changes have been one of the most hotly debated and discussed topics since the last 6 to 8 months. I think it'll be important to also get a bit of an understanding of the background, what possibly led to these changes. Just quickly, an IC is classically a delegated decision-making body, which is usually set up either at the manager level or at the fund level. And the key role of the IC is basically to act as a screening committee for all investments and divestments. So the groundwork is done, say, by an investment team. They do the diligence, they do the groundwork, they arrive at a particular decision. That decision is classically screened through the IC before the investment or divestment is actually undertaken. Now, the IC could effectively be a final determining authority in terms of being the final check before the investment is done. Or it could be the penultimate decision-making authority where the IC takes the decision. And then the final decision is, say, ratified by the board of the manager, or say in certain offshore funds, it is ratified by the board of the fund before the final decision is actually made. So this is typically the role of the IC. Now, when we look at the composition of IC, at least what we've seen in the industry, composition of the IC is classically individuals with some expertise, some backgrounds, and these are individuals with gray hair, and Richie may disagree with me there. But typically, these are individuals classically with a gray hair who have a certain standing in the market, because investors from their side also would look, okay, who is the repository of all decision making? Well, yes, these are 3-4 members on the IC, and we are fairly comfortable. Now, how are ICs classically composed? IC, say, you will not see these IC constructs in entrepreneurial funds. Say, if Ritesh were to launch a fund, he may be the sole decision-making person there. But we've seen IC in classically large group structures where it's, a fairly large group where senior individuals from other group entities would want to come and would want to showcase the expertise to the larger investor base. We've seen IC being fairly common in joint venture funds where two GPs from diverse backgrounds come together to manage or set up a particular fund. There they would want to place certain senior key managerial persons from their respective groups on the IC to ensure that they have some say in the decision making. So this is where we've seen ICs being classically composed, and I would say the last situation, though it's fairly rare, and I think with these SEBI changes, it may completely go out of the window, is certain large institutional investors have also at times in the past asked for a seat in the IC. And this is where you have a fund where 40-50% is being contributed by a large investor. Of course, they may be justified in asking for a seat in the IC because there is a significant capital at play for them. Now, with this background, when we look at SEBI approval mechanism in terms of when and how SEBI approves, when we file the application with SEBI, classically the kind of information, the kind of KYC diligence which SEBI does is basically, of course, on the 3-4 entities: manager, sponsor, fund, trustee. and on the directors of these three entities, and perhaps on the key managing person. A key managing person is somebody with the requisite track record experience. We need to showcase that, of course, there's one person with 5 years track record who is going to be leading the charge at the manager level. This individual is supposed to be either an employee or a director of the manager. SEBI, at least in our experience in the past, has not really gone into that. Okay, if there's an IC also, let me see who the individuals are. Let me do a diligence on these IC members. Now, basis this background, what we understand, this could be purely apocryphal, and is that in some investigation which SEBI was conducting, there was some discussion in terms of why certain decisions were made in terms of investments, divestments, etc. And when SEBI raised the question, the fund manager that time raised their hand that, see, we had nothing to do. We did the diligence, passed on the decision to the IC. It's an independent committee which took its own decisions, so don't question us if you won't question the IC, which is why SEBI suddenly realized that, what is this new animal which is being thrown to us? We don't understand this. Neither do we recognize this in the regulations, at least. Of course, it is a fairly standard industry practice, but as a regulator, they have not really been diligencing or applying their mind behind the construct, composition, role of the IC, etc., which is what led to some of these changes. I would just perhaps pause here and pass on the baton to Richie to just throw some light in terms of the changes and our ask to the regulators.
Yeah. One more thing. Vijay, one more thing, if you can highlight on, because of the changes that the investment committee has brought in, you have been part of a lot of fund structures. What is the changes that you've seen from the industry players in terms of setting up their IC? Because I believe global investors usually love to be part of IC, to be part of the decision making. Do you see any obstruction? Do you see increase in demand in terms of having a DNO insurance? What is it that you've seen over a period of time?
No, sure. Thanks, Leela, and thanks, Devas, for the input. See, I think to begin with, ICs were constructed to bring a lot more fluid process to the entire decision making and how you construct the portfolio. So can we keep it outside the board of directors or those who are sort of recognized under law to be cast with fiduciary obligations and so on and so forth? So it is pretty much always the senior most members of the team who are part of the IC. And it's not as if, IC is bereft of any obligations. The law of a fund pretty much comes from what the investor is expected to do. So when we draft the investor documents, the fund PPM, etc., that frankly is the real framework of the law, because investors sort of tie in the fund manager with what are the processes they want the IC meetings to sort of follow to come to certain decisions. So which is where when we thought that, and when we saw that SEBI is coming back with rules and trying to tighten how ICs looked at how the construct sort of works, it came as a bit of a surprise, because ultimately, if the objective was that we want Indian owned and controlled theme to sort of flow through, ICs are always constructed by the board of the investment manager in an Indian context. The manager retains the ability to replace one or more members of the IC. And accordingly, when we are looking at it from a perspective of Indian owned and control, I think pretty much looking at the board composition of the manager could have sufficed. Having said that, now we are in a space today where IC is put pretty much on the same pedestal as the rest of the management team and the board of directors. So in this case, I think from an investor perspective, we have always seen an initial seeking of perhaps an observer seat on the IC, or maybe even a member on the IC. That's when, and I'm talking about 2007, 10, 11 vintages. That time there was still some fancy attached to being part of the IC, either as an observer or as a pure member. Suddenly, a lot of jurisprudence came in, a lot of sophistication also came into the Indian LP class when they realized that there are a lot of fiduciary obligations attached to being part of the IC. And accordingly, they realized that if there are meaningful third-party investors coming apart from them, they would rather step away from the IC and focus more on strengthening the LPAC, the Investors Advisory Board, and so on and so forth. They could make the investment manager a lot more accountable to the LPAC, so that they achieve their objectives, but at the same time, they don't take up the fiduciary obligations. I think coming back to finally where we are from a SEBI perspective, SEBI obviously does recognize the distinction between internal members and external members, like Devas was summarizing. Internal members are anyone who's a director or a partner of the manager. And accordingly, if let's say the fund manager is a joint venture where some overseas GP has also participated, then in that case, them being a part of the IC, even though they are a non-resident, still makes them an internal member, not an external member. That is perfectly fine. If an entity does not own any stake in the fund manager entity, then they're an external member. In which case, if they are a non-resident, only then do we see the rigor of the law that SEBI has said that, okay, we may not be comfortable clearing these applications right now. So today, Leela, I think just to summarize where we are, a lot of confusion in the market as to what situations are allowed, what situations are not allowed. And frankly, it's about making the meeting of minds happen between LP and GP and to put the SEBI regulations into perspective. I can go
Thanks,
on, but I
Rishi.
think I'll take a pause.
Yeah. Thanks, Rishi. Ritesh, coming to you, tax is your forte. Where is the issue that you've seen in terms of tax? Do you see any complications that have come up because of this changes from SEBI?
Sure, Leela. I think I'll pick up from where perhaps Richie left, in terms of the confusion that has been created. And at least from a tax perspective, now there is an interesting conundrum that has now come up, right? Because all throughout, we were of the view that a fund manager is responsible to determine whether a fund is a resident of India or a non-resident of India from a tax perspective, because most often fund managers were constituted as LLPs, and if you looked at LLP, control and management became a determinative test. Now with the role of IC being highlighted in the manner SEBI has, and looking at the constitution of the IC in terms of resident, non-resident status, both for tax and for exchange control purposes, I think this brings up a whole new twist to how a fund will be taxed in itself. Say, for example, in a given year, 4 out of the 5 IC members are non-residents. And picking on, what Devas was just saying, that look, IC makes the decision, manager did the diligence and made a recommendation, etc. If a construct of that kind was to follow, would you believe the fund is a non-resident? Because the change in the tax rate is quite drastic. It's possibly from 34 to 44, and therefore that changes your entire return equation in an ordinary. In an ordinary year, assuming it's a Cat 3, but it's a Cat 1, Cat 2, you still have pass through. And therefore, to that extent, Leela, this proposal and this idea has only resulted in more confusion rather than making life simple for any one of us.
Thanks, Ritesh. While from an industry perspective, what I see is still there is a lot of lack of clarity in terms of who the external members is, because I get a lot of calls from the industry keeping on asking who is defined as an external member. There are a lot of investment committee members who are just for corporate governance, which is basically giving a holistic framework, approving the policies. A lot of people are still confused as to what exactly it means. If I have to say a quick takeaway, I think a tax clarity and a clarity on how the external IC members play, it will be very helpful to the industry, while a good corporate governance is always welcome from the industry for a good strong base for the industry to grow, but making it too onerous sometimes makes it slightly restrictive for the external mind to get into the organization to help us and launch new products in the market. Thanks. This was interesting. We move on to the next topic, which is while most of the people who would be doing offshore marketing would be very well aware of the term sophisticated investors, qualified investors, accredited investors. In March, SEBI came out with a very Indianized version of accredited investors. Rishi, since you are very excited about this topic, I would want you to hold this baton and help us deep dive into this concept, and what is your view?
No, sure. Thank you. I think the way this paper has to be received is from a perspective that SEBI is realizing increasingly that it has for long worn the mantle of being very keen for investor protection. And it is in line with the different products that have been launched historically, the mutual funds, the portfolio management, which started at a 5 lakh rupee ticket size, and so on and so forth. But increasingly, SEBI is also getting a lot of feedback from the industry that there is enough sophistication in the investor base, that the time should be ripe to try out newer products. I think this is where IFSC sort of also came into play. That IFSC for the first time, SEBI did take up the AIF regulations, but relaxed a lot of norms. All the concentration norms around the 25% on Cat 1, Cat 2, and 10% Cat 3. All of those were relaxed, and so on and so forth. So I think it is time that a certain segment of the Indian investor base be recognized as accredited investors. So far, SEBI has been taking an approach that, okay, if an investor is committing 70 crores or more, which is equivalent to $10 million at that point in time, they are sophisticated enough to understand the risk return profile of the product. And accordingly, they need not be sheltered by the regulatory mechanisms out there. And accordingly, the manager dealing with such sophisticated, large ticket size investor would have been allowed to have some fine tuning, some finesse on the product. And SEBI would have been a little more accommodating that, okay, this is somewhat, it's a diversion from what the law says, but at the same time, we are comfortable because these are conversations between two absolutely sophisticated parties. Now, what the paper does is that it introduces the concept of accredited investors. There are, sort of eligibility criteria, both from an income perspective and from an asset test net worth perspective. What it does is that it would reduce the ticket size expected from an accredited investor. Instead of expecting somebody to be deemed sophisticated only on account of $10 million of allocation, maybe a much smaller allocation, maybe a crore rupee of commitment to an AI product or whatever, as long as you are sophisticated with what you are as an investor. And accordingly, SEBI does sort of seem to be thinking that can we relax all the concentration limits, the leverage rules, and so on and so forth. What Leela, what enthusiasms us about all this is that SEBI is looking to try out new products. Otherwise, there was no development in the financial services industry. And unless you test it out in a larger ticket size environment of an AIF, that I think would be a good gateway to start the entire process. Or the portfolio management regulations where the ticket size is now 50 lakhs. So there, there is a lot of appetite to do some sophistication in the product. Maybe the leverage rules also can be relooked for the PMS product, which is so far allowed only 1x. So a lot more products can be introduced, and this would definitely help, push India to the next phase of growth. More interestingly, internationally, it is the fund managers who are regulated. It's only in India in an AIF environment where you see the actual pot of the capital, the fund itself being regulated. The manager is regulated, sort of as a tertiary point because a lot of obligations are cast. So hopefully with the introduction of accredited investor, maybe the regulations could focus less on the funds themselves, but more on the investor manager so that the ecosystem sort of develops and there are lesser concerns coming from that space. So I think the whole thinking in this direction is what is the most exciting part about all this.
Thanks, Rishi. That's helpful. One thing I would like to add to Divas and Divas and Ritesh, it also talks about accredited certification status. While Rishi rightfully pointed out that offshore in the global market, you always see accredited investors either to be relying on a self-certification or relying on the fund manager to do the due diligence and figure out whether an investor is accredited or not. But this accreditation status, because already the investors are grappling with CKYC, linking of their PAN to Aadhaar, adding a more layer of complication of maintaining a certification of accreditation and sophistication slightly adds more complication to this path of moving to the accredited. Divas or Ritesh, if you can throw some light on it, on your view.
So, Leela, the way I were to look at it, of course, no changes would come with its own share of pitfalls and certain challenges. But the way I see it is, I would say it would be the lesser of an evil in the larger scheme of things, as Richie was mentioning, if we were to look for a fair bit of sophistication coming from investors, and we're talking about fairly large investors who have a significant asset base. I would say it would not be onerous on them to just refer back to their respective chartered accountants or compliance professionals and get that certification that, yes, we do meet some of these norms. And this is also the practice globally, whether you see it in the Singapore context, in the European context, in the American context. It is predominantly a self-certification norm. Well, of course, now as an additional check and balance, it would be the manager's KYC, whether the manager is comfortable taking self-certification, or because the manager is asking for certain leeways and rebates from the regulatory standpoint, whether the manager would want to go a step further and say that, of course, self-certification is fine, but I would also want to couple it with a CA certificate or a compliance professional who does really confirm the income and asset test. So I would say that this is something which would be a minimal, which the regulators may also expect.
Yeah, thanks, Divas.
Yeah.
I will take a quick pause over here. I would request the audience to pose their questions in case we'd be happy to take your questions at the end of the session. We move on to a third session, which is, while we spoke about the investment decision making, we also spoke about investors. The third most important part for the AIF industry is to have a lot of gamut of products to come out, because it is known as a high leverage industry. It is known as coming up with innovative products. So the third product that I've always seen fund managers asking is, can we do a fund of fund, which is investing and relying on talent of other fund managers and also doing some bit of direct investment. So it's a combination, it's the best combination of two fund managers applying their mind. Ritesh, you have been part of a lot of fund structuring and discussions with SEBI. What is your view, and where is SEBI leading to in terms of this fund type?
Sure. I think at the moment where we stand, Leela, is that fund of funds are possible, except with the restriction that some amount of direct investment may not be possible, right? So essentially, as a fund of fund, you could consider investing in other funds, but not in another portfolio directly. And at some point, I think the theory behind all of this is backed by the economics of, the layering of cost, etc. And how does this sort of turn out in terms of efficiency insofar as the ultimate LP is concerned? And therefore, there has been that bit of, I suppose, lack of commercial clarity in a regulator's mind. And this is something that also, in terms of the position to make direct investments, SEBI has also recently clarified it in its board meeting. But what we are hoping is that in the near future, SEBI will really come back and revisit this entire proposal, understand the merits of it, especially now given that the government itself has announced a whole bunch of fund of funds in terms of supporting real estate sector or the startups or some bit of the industrial infra, etc. So I think in that direction, a little bit of openness to the idea of allowing for some direct investments is there is a good case for it, if I may sort of put it that way. I think the industry is open to having some kind of a checklist or sort of checks and balances in its entire process. But I think this is really an idea we should open ourselves to.
Yeah. Thanks, Ritesh. Devas, you have been speaking with the regulators quite often on this fund structure. So your views on it?
Yeah. So on this one, Leela, I think where we see the key challenge in the regulator's mind is basically somewhere they feel that this could be used where the fund of fund is, of course, investing in its daughter funds and also investing directly in underlying companies. This could be used as sort of a roundabout or a conduit to breach the concentration norms or breach the diversification norms, which are typically otherwise applicable. Because as a fund of fund, you could invest 100% of your corpus in a daughter fund, but your direct investments in portfolio companies is restricted to 25%. So they feel that somewhere using these structures, fund managers may potentially get a higher share of an underlying portfolio company, which is otherwise permissible under the regulations. So I think with that background is why they were a little hesitant to allow fund of funds also to invest or to make direct investment. But as Ritesh was also saying, we've seen some positive development on this one in the SEBI board meeting pursuant to all our joint efforts which we made with the regulators. So hoping something positive should come out of it, because it's definitely a need of the hour. And we've seen this across global fund structures. If you see any of the large global fund of funds, while they of course partake in fund-specific opportunities, but they always have that additional or a part of their portfolio which is also in direct investment. So it's definitely something which is required by the industry, and we hope that SEBI would listen, which they seem to have, and come out with some positive changes.
Yeah, thanks, Divas. We move on to the last topic of our discussion, which is which you keep on spotting in the newspapers, which is co-investment structures to be allowed with a fund. While the panelists are very excited about this discussion, we'll quickly bifurcate the section into three portions. Rishi, if you may highlight on what are the options for the people, because if you see industry with this digi tech economy, which is spotted up suddenly, there are a lot of interest from the global investors to come into the PE funds. While they want to come into the PE funds, they also want their share of more participation in these set of investors, but they don't want to deal with the daily rigmarole of getting into SPAs, SHAs, and MISs. So what is this type of structure that you suggest, or you usually suggest to your clients in terms of structuring a co-investment?
Sure. See, I think to begin with, co-investments obviously have been in vogue for a significant amount of time. What was happening is that most of the BCP funds were largely overseas vehicles. It's only since 2017-18 when the AIF regulations opened up that despite absorbing foreign investments, if the manager is India owned control, it would be sort of tagged as a domestic investor. That's when the value of an AIF really unlocked as a mechanism to sort of get investments into India, uh, which frankly then also highlighted the struggle between and the differences between overseas investors and domestic investors. Suddenly, overseas LPs who wanted a deeper participation in a portfolio realized that coming directly under the FDI program could be undermining the way they participate. It could sort of also undermine the kind of rights they have, the pricing guidelines, the put call options, and so on and so forth. Which is where suddenly after 2018 we saw flurry of queries that how can we innovatively look at the AI format to have a deeper participation in the portfolio, such that while there is co-mingling at the pool level, yet could we activate a new class of units or something on a segregated basis, such that the common pool investors have a mechanism to have a deeper participation. Now, while in the past we're aware that some of the structures have gone live with something like this, in one of the recent cases we did get feedback from SEBI that okay, they feel that this disturbs the blind pool nature of the entire the format that they're trying to regulate. But thankfully they were open, and when IFSC sort of came into play, one of the first circulars that was issued that okay, we sort of knocked down the concentration limits of 10 and 25, the leverage rules, and more importantly, we also allow you to have a segregated sort of structure through a separate class of units through which you can have a deeper participation. So in some form or shape, with IFSCA now coming into play, we can look at slightly more structured format of organizing co-investments, where you set up the feeder perhaps in Mauritius, Singapore, or IFSC. You activate a new class of units for the co-investments, which now the regulator seems to be comfortable with from IFSCA perspective. Otherwise, you had the slightly suboptimal situations like could we look at the portfolio manager regime, which also underwent a change. Now, portfolio managers, if they're operating on a non-discretionary basis, which means that there is one more layer of feedback taken from the client, as opposed to discretionary when the manager takes a final call. So, which is where some amount of illiquidity is allowed to be injected in the portfolio, which is where the AIFs and other products sort of come into play. But that, frankly, is not a great way to tailor a co-investment. So, unless the clients are comfortable with an FDI route, co-investment route, IFSCA seems to be the only other sustainable or scalable co-investment option out there.
Thanks, Rishi. Ritesh, if you may want to throw some light from the tax perspective or your discussions with the investors that you usually have while you structure the co-investment.
No, I think from a tax perspective, essentially the only item that surfaces is how do you regard the coming together of people with a common investment objective, right? Because in tax, you have this concept of what is called as an association of persons, which is really a collective agency mechanism to tax people who have a common pool of income. And that really is, is one of the most difficult mechanisms to subject someone to tax, because if you look at the rates that will apply, the division of income, and the controversy around whether income has overridden by title or does it belong to a common pool, I think those are really the complex aspects of how co-investment is now mushrooming. And is like Richie said, if investors are comfortable with using the FDI route, life is perhaps a little more simpler. But if not, some of this really from a tax perspective is, so to put it, as venturing into uncharted territories, especially in the funds space. We've seen AOP as a risk in government contracts and turnkey contracts. We've had some bit of judicial views on it, but in a fund mechanism, really, how should the principle be construed, etc., is really uncharted territories.
Thanks, Ritesh. Devas, you also do a lot of structuring with global investors in terms of fund launch, and I see a lot of demand coming from the tech side for having a co-investment. What is your perspective in terms of what is an alternative suggestion that you give to your investors?
Richie and Ritesh have summed it up very well, and I'm conscious of the time. So just quickly, See, I think the key demand is co-investment. There is a commercial need of the hour, as Richie also said. What we need to ensure co-investment is done in a proper manner is that there should be alignment of interest, where the fund manager takes a call that, okay, as the fund is exiting, the co-investors also exit. And secondly, there should also be the flexibility for the fund manager to charge fee and carry on that co-investment model. Now, if not the AIF, what are the alternative mechanisms? PMS, but the changes in 2019 where discretionary cannot invest in unlisted and non-discretionary cannot do more than 25 in 25% in unlisted really put a stop to all of these co-investment related structures through PMS. Advisory's inherent challenge that it has to be non-binding. Then there is a SEBI guidance also which says that you really can't charge performance-linked incentive on the advisory construct. And because it's non-binding, investors may take their own calls in terms of exits, and it could create a messy situation at the portfolio company level. And the last is, of course, is a co-investment vehicle. We've seen some of these structures at play, but these structures also have an inherent regulatory risk that tomorrow can a co-investment vehicle which is set up outside the AIF in itself constitute as an AIF because it meets with the pooling criteria and all of those things. And while those structures have been there, but of course, fraught with their own risks and challenges. So now with all of these, I think the demand from the industry is that, at least give us some flexibility on some aspect, right? You can't, because this is a commercial need of the hour. This is what Indian investors are demanding. This is what all overseas investors are demanding. So give us some flexibility, give us some leeway to ensure that we function in a fair manner and there is no challenge of an Indian AIF vis-a-vis any offshore product.
Thanks, this is very helpful. While IFSC has started out the co-investment criteria, it would be very helpful for the domestic fund managers to also have that flexibility because the brain, the most of the brain for the Indian fund managers sits in India. They wouldn't want to move to GIFT City, which gives us a very slow growth in terms of the co-investment demand. While we have come to the fag end of the session, and being part of advocacy committee, we are always been demanding, but one ask from the regulators that you would want to have. I'm not sure whether SEBI would be hearing us today, but it's worth the while to put our demands to SEBI. Rishi, I will go with you first.
Sure. I think maybe a pass-through status even on the GST aspects, because a lot of the VCP industry is struggling with that. It puts the difference between an offshore structure and an onshore AIF structure into stark differences. The leakages are huge, and maybe something there. Yeah, that'll be great.
Yeah, thanks, Rishi. Devas, what about you?
Well, I
have a list, I'm sure.
Or some tax clarity for Cat 3 AIFs, and it's something which the industry has been asking for many years. Even if not a pass-through status, at least some clarity that let it be a single point of taxation, so that there is no issue tomorrow when assessments, etc.
Yeah, thanks, Ritesh. I'm sure you would have a list of tax issues, but just one.
No, I think both of them spoke of tax, so I'll rest my case. So you know what is the most complex issue really. So no, I think in fairness, the accredited investors approach is actually a very welcome step. But what we should do is extend this to applying under the income tax law also. You don't want to get under issues of 68, 69. And India, unfortunately, has always had that history of doubting people with money, right? So if the minute you've put in cash into a company, a subscription, you've always been questioned. So coming from that historical background, all the way back since 1961, I think it's just about time we sort of let ourselves believe in the governance ecosystem we create. I think have that openness in mind when you look at especially AIFs. That's, if at all, the only request I can put at a very policy level.
Yeah, and as an industry player, I would come to the very basic of my demand, which is please approve our products soon, because we're seeing a lag of 3 to 4 months in every product, and business has been bashing us left, right? So I will just demand one thing from SEBI is please approve our products. We have come to the fag end of the session. Aditi, you have any questions for us?
Not really. Let me quickly check with the audience. Audience, if you have any questions, can you quickly put up in the Ask a Question tab? Let's just wait for a minute to see if
Sure.
see any questions. I don't see any questions, so we can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. You've been a great panel today. Had a good discussion. I enjoyed thoroughly this discussion, and thank you everyone for being a great audience. Hopefully the session was informative. God bless you. Take care. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Stay safe, guys.